Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stacked podcast. Unfortunately, today my good co host Mikkel is not able to join, but we're more than compensated by having an amazing guest today. Welcome, Willem from Botanix Labs. Hello, Willem. How are you today?
Thank you. Very good. Great to be here.
No, thank you so much for coming on. I've seen a lot about Botanix Labs. I've been, in a way, very attracted by the name Spiderchain. It looks like it's something like very interesting in nature. So I want to dive deeper into that. I'm sure our viewers want to learn more about that as well. But before we start diving into the specifics of Botanix Labs, what you guys are doing, Spiderchain, everything that is going on there. Let's start with a little bit about yourself. Classic question, introduce yourself, please. Share us the knowledge about how you got into Bitcoin, into crypto. What's your background story?
Sounds good. Awesome. Willem, grew up in Belgium. I have a bit of a mathematics background, so I became third in a national mathematics competition in Belgium. Then ended up doing electrical engineering, focused a bit on cryptography, so I researched in authenticated encryption. Actually, very funnily enough, part of the design of the spider chain comes from my cryptography background. Yeah, then ended up working in chemicals, moved to Saudi Arabia, so lived 2 years in Saudi, traveled around the Middle East a lot, basically saw people get their bank accounts seized in Lebanon. Then went to Harvard, so moved to Boston and now New York. And I think my entry into the crypto space was when I saw Bitcoin in my cryptography classes quite a while back. But it took me really seeing the bigger macro picture before I fully fell down the rabbit hole. And then around 2 years ago is when I came up with the idea for Botanix at Harvard. Actually, basically, I was looking at the whole crypto infrastructure and I was trying to figure out where this thing was going to like 100 years from now. And I saw Bitcoin, of course, perfect, decentralized, best money ever made. Really good sound money. And then outside of Bitcoin, you had a huge amount of applications. And so realized that a lot of those applications are built on virtual machines. And the EVM is by far the most adopted virtual machine. And so I wanted to bring the EVM to Bitcoin. And so that's a little bit, where we started 2 years ago. I want to bring the EVM as a second layer to Bitcoin. And now living in New York.
Awesome, awesome. I mean, you got me at Belgium. I think you might know I'm also Belgian. It's great to see fellow Belgians in the industry. Tell me more about like what made you move out of Belgium. Like, I mean, everyone has its own reason. Like for me, it was work. I feel like Belgium's relatively small. I obviously had to leave behind family, friends, but get out of Belgium to kind of broaden the network, broaden the opportunity. I would say. What's your reason for leaving Belgium?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the original reason was always I was very entrepreneurship minded. I really wanted to start a company, did a bunch of different projects before. And yeah, the opportunity in the US and outside of Belgium is just way bigger to start companies, to raise capital. But I eventually left when I moved for work to Saudi Arabia. But then, yeah, of course, in Saudi, I wanted to start a Bitcoin company. And so, starting that is way easier in the US than in Saudi Arabia or Belgium, of course.
Interesting. And so, did you start anything before Botanix Labs, or is Botanix Labs your first startup actually?
I've never raised money for a startup, but yeah, had a bunch of different side ventures, built some websites that I sold, flipped real estate houses, built some scooter companies, built like indoor low Bluetooth low energy devices. So yeah, a
Okay.
bunch of different things, but this is the first company I raised capital for, or outside capital.
Interesting. So the entrepreneur is kind of in you for sure. Like you know what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. The
Awesome.
coolest story. I don't think I've ever told this in any of the podcasts, but yeah, I used to be a big RuneScape gamer. Um,
Okay.
so
What's
uh,
that? Tell me all about it. I don't know anything about that. I'm not a gamer. I have no clue what that means.
so RuneScape was very popular when I was like 15, 16 year old. And so, I mean, it was a proper economy where you can like sell in the open market on RuneScape. You had like party hats and other stuff. And so I was quite good at building up accounts. And so I ended up selling some accounts that I built up to like the highest level or skill level, and then sold them to people in real life in my high school. So
That's
that's like my
awesome.
first
That's
venture.
awesome. And then you put that money in Bitcoin, I hope.
Bitcoin wasn't even around back then.
I wasn't even around back then. You look still young, so would have been possible. So, but no, that's awesome to hear, and that's exactly like what we want to talk about in this podcast. Like, I would love to talk a lot more about like your personal background, but we also have to talk about something called the spider chain. Tell me more about like Botanix itself. What's the difference? Like, you have Botanix Labs, you have Spider Chain. Why is it not called maybe Botanix Chain? Why the thing with spiders? You're trying to be Spider Man. I don't know. Like, what's the story? What's the background? And like, what is it different from the other layer twos that we see around?
Yeah, good question. So Botanix Labs is a company. Think about off-chain labs. Arbitrum is like the product there, and so the spider chain for us is really the product. And actually, the spider chain is one of the big breakthroughs in layer two designs, especially on Bitcoin. I think all layer two designs typically follow a very similar approach to like rollups, a very centralized sequencer that aims to be trustless, but still run by a singular company. The spider chain is completely different. It is actually more shares more of like the design thinking of like the Lightning Network on Bitcoin. So it aims to be fully decentralized, where you can have 10,000 full nodes or 100,000 full nodes, where anyone can permissionly participate. And so it takes a different route than your typical layer two designs. And I can go deeper as well in like how exactly the spider chain works or like how it's named. But that's a little bit the difference between Botanix Labs and the spider chain is really the layer two design in how to bring an EVM to Bitcoin. So the spider chain only runs on Bitcoin. The whole thing is only connected to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the native gas fee, is the native currency on the EVM. So it feels like you're transacting on Ethereum, but the whole thing runs on Bitcoin.
Got it. That's super interesting. So obviously, like, not a fan of centralized sequencers. Understand, like, with Spider Chain, you're trying to do things differently in a way. You have a bunch of I forgot the name, the typical nodes that you have to kind of, to me, like, if I look at it, right, it looks like you're kind of building a proof of stake mechanism on top of or a delegated proof of stake maybe mechanism on top of Bitcoin, where you actually have people or like organizations running validator nodes, or I don't know what you call them, something else, right?
Orchestrator nodes, yeah.
Orchestrator nodes, right? So you have these orchestrator nodes. Is that very similar to, let's say, a validator node in a delegated proof of stake network? Or maybe explain a little bit more about the difference and like the specific specifications about those things.
Yeah, correct. So once you move away from centralization, you need consensus again. And so basically, we will start with, on day one of mainnet, we will start with 15 different sequencers. So we'll be decentralized from day one. And you basically, once you are decentralized, you need to come together in a consensus. Now, I used to be a big believer in proof of work, but I realized that proof of stake actually as a second layer on Bitcoin makes a lot of sense because you get a lot of guarantees and security guarantees from the proof of work on the base layer. And so if you build a proof of stake on a second layer, basically all the different issues that you have of building a proof of stake as a base layer on layer one are removed because you can tie in that proof of work of Bitcoin. And so in essence, how it looks like is, for example, if you have 10,000 different nodes or orchestrators, they all run a full node. They come together in a proof of stake consensus, and that secures the EVM. So it's almost literally like you take Ethereum, where you have, I don't know, almost a million full nodes, but you basically put that on top of Bitcoin as a second layer in a proof of stake. The stakers stake Bitcoin, and all those stakers, all those full nodes secure and validate the same EVM.
Got it. That's quite smart. I think I have two questions around that. Like one is in terms of scalability. I mean, you mentioned thousands or hundred thousands of nodes potentially. Uh, how scalable is that? Like to still reach consensus? Like how does that impact the speed? I think that would be my first question. Um, Second question, I forgot. So I'll let you answer the first question first. I'll try to think of the second one in the meantime.
I think it's a great question because the reason why layer twos on Ethereum are going more for like the centralized solution is because it comes at the cost of speed. We all know the blockchain trilemma. You cannot be both extremely decentralized and have like zero point 0.1 second blocks. We know that that's a blockchain trilemma. And so what you have on Ethereum, you go from like 12-second blocks on Ethereum layer one. And then on the layer two, on like the roll ups, you can go to zero point 0.1 second blocks because you can be trustless, but you can be very centralized but trustless. And so we believe what Bitcoin first needs is like Bitcoin on the base layer, very decentralized 10-minute blocks, but it needs this intermediate layer that's more like an Ethereum actually, that has like 10-second blocks, but can be still extremely decentralized. So that's what we're going towards. Like we want to build that second layer on Bitcoin that's still decentralized. And then you can of course fit in layer threes. Like once you take like the optimism stack, for example, you can copy paste that. We're fully EVM equivalent, so you can copy paste that and build that on top of us. And so that's how we see Bitcoin scaling. You go from Bitcoin, the base layer, 10-minute blocks, extremely decentralized, best money ever made, to like a Botanix with the Spiderchain, 10-second blocks, more like your Ethereum, but still decentralized. And this is like perfect for a financial system in the world. You want that to be decentralized. And then if you want to go extremely fast blocks, you need to go centralized. So
Hmm.
that's a little bit how we see the scaling of
I
Bitcoin.
see. That's quite different from many of the other things I see out there. Like, I mean, not sure like if you compare it that way as well, but to me it seems like others dare to take compromise or right dare to compromise there on the decentralization aspect more towards like get speed on the layer twos. But so you're saying we're fine with 10-second block time, let others make those things, but it won't be as decentralized as our and our value prop is more on the decentralization aspect.
Correct, correct. So exactly, all the roll-ups follow the road. Like you want to be trustless and centralized. We go into like where we believe decentralization is important. We believe that's also important for the layer two on Bitcoin. I think it's less important for like roll-ups on Ethereum because you already have 10-second blocks, so you need something really, really fast. But for Bitcoin, we first want this like more decentralized layer two.
Got it. Got it. So, and you mentioned so you start with 15 or so, like on mainnet. I read something about like it's kind of a federation to begin with, but then you guys will gradually scale this out. Like, what timelines are we talking here? Like, when can we expect, let's say, a million nodes on? Let's say 1,000. Let's say 1,000 on Spiderchain.
Yeah, I think we start with 15. With the tech stack that we have, we can quickly scale to 100. After 100, once you go from like 100 to 1,000, that will take, I think, 6 months to a year of development. Once you go to a million, I think that will take another year. So maybe if everything goes well, 2 or 3 years of development is what it will take us.
Got
Something like
it.
that, optimistically
Got
speaking.
it. Got it. Your answer reminds me of the second question I wanted to ask was actually about the tech stack that you use to reach consensus around these nodes. Is that an existing like a consensus mechanism or layer that you use, or did you guys build everything like from scratch?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think because this is not your normal proof of stake, or not a proof of stake that eventually is being built today, like more for layer ones, we will have to build our own special consensus, and it's going to look more like the consensus that you have, or the proof of stake consensus that you have on Ethereum. Now we don't need the full blown consensus with the Casper algorithm to protect you against a long range attack, etc., because we tie into the proof of work of Bitcoin. But there's nothing out there today that has that. So we will start with a very standard, and that's why we have this jump from like 15 to 100, and then beyond the 100 is where the modifications in the consensus need to come in. So we start with a very standard PBFT consensus algorithm.
Got it. Got it. Makes a lot of sense. Maybe more of a question around. I don't know how to phrase this. Is like in terms of idealistic views, like how much decentralization do you need in order to say, look, we're decentralized? Because decentralization, it's a spectrum, right? If you say 15, start sounds like a very good start. To me, like if you reach 50 or 100, that's already very decentralized in a matter. Like, what's your spectrum that you have in mind in a way? Where do you see this going?
I think that's a great question. I think I like to think very long term, like think 100 years ahead, and how does that world look like, and then work backwards from there. And so, in my mind, how that world looks like is the whole world runs with Bitcoin as the money, right? I think tokens are a better version of the stocks today, like a 10x better version. It's open, it's permissionless. Anyone in the world can buy a certain stock or token. Decentralized
24/7.
exchanges, exactly. Decentralized exchanges are a better version of the stock exchanges you have today. And so you have borrowing and lending protocols. What if you want to buy a house, for example, or what if you want to borrow? These protocols are more open, more trustless than you have with the banks today. It's more permissionless. And so 100 years from now, I can see this world where you use Bitcoin to buy anything, to borrow against, buy anything in the world, buy stocks, open, permissionless, and that full decentralized financial system that we already have, like the first visions on like Ethereum, what you see there with DeFi, that actually at some point can run the whole world. But I think that fits best on like the second layer on Bitcoin. Now, if you have a global financial system where all financial institutions, think about hedge funds, think about, I think market makers today are kind of like the hedge funds that we saw before, where you are like the tokens being the new stocks, where you have the stock exchanges. How decentralized does that financial system have to be? That's basically the question that we're answering. And so for money, I think Bitcoin has to be extremely decentralized. For the financial system, I think we fit in there. I think that will be perfect for us in the sense that you don't want a financial system to be ruled by 10 people, 10 countries in the world, because basically that those 10 countries or those 15 can come together and say like, look, let's ban all the Belgians from the financial system. I mean, that would not be great for the Belgians, right? And so you kind of want to have that financial system that's sufficiently decentralized. And so is 15 enough? I don't think so. Is 100 enough? Tricky. But if you go into like 1,000 or 10,000, that's more than sufficient enough, I think, to actually run a global decentralized financial system. And I think that's important. I think that's a world where I'm working towards. That's a world I believe in. I think that would be fully permissionless, open 24/7, equal, fair for everyone in the world to participate in. So I think that's what's needed.
I love that. I love that vision and the long term aspect of things. But would you say 100 years is like too long? Like, who knows? Maybe we won't be around in 100 years. Like, what's your like shorter term? Like, don't you think we can accomplish this in a shorter period in 100 years?
No, that's true. I think realistically, maybe the world will look like this in 30 years' time. Absolutely. But I was trying
Nice.
to, I tried to think like from a really long time horizon and
Yeah.
then work backwards.
No,
Yeah.
no, that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk. I mean, we're talking future here, right? Like, how does your L2 solution in general like contributes to the future of Bitcoin specifically, and how do you see in general like other L2s contribute to the future of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think if we want to scale Bitcoin to 8 billion people to a global market, we need a huge amount of scaling solutions. We don't need one scaling solutions, we need a huge amount. And ideally, each one of these scaling solution has a different trade-off. And so today you have the Lightning Network. The Lightning Network is perfect for payments. If you want to buy a coffee, I mean, that's perfect. You can do that on the Lightning Network. But if you want to borrow against your Bitcoin, or if you want to like buy stocks or use a financial system, I think that's perfect where you need a virtual machine. And ideally, you want that to be decentralized. But then you have other scaling solutions that maybe fit themselves better for like being extremely fast. Think about like more gaming applications or more lower risk, buying NFTs or etc. Does that have to be decentralized? No, not really, right? And so you can see all these different scaling solutions have all different trade-offs, and we need all of them. We need a lot of them. Ideally, if you want to scale this to 8 billion people and a global market, a global financial system, there's a lot of transactions happening, and people often look to like the Visa transactions, but that's only a small part of like the global economy. And the global economy is actually what you will like fully want to run there. And so I think the spider chain is unique. Spider chain is unique in this scaling approach because we go for this more decentralized approach, and that comes at the cost, of course, of speed. So there we go for more 10 seconds, but yeah, I think it's absolutely needed.
Got it. Got it. I mean, if we talk about getting the entire like financial system, and even broader than just the financial system on Bitcoin, we talk scalability is one of the main things which I think you guys optimize for in a way. How do you see? So you say you're hinting at like L3s kind of on top of Spider Chain, right? How, let's say as a builder, like someone has a great idea for whatever it is. How do they decide between, okay, I'm going to build a Bitcoin L2 directly on Bitcoin, or I'm going to go and be an L3 on Spider Chain? What's the main like value prop, I would say, for doing that?
Yeah, I think in the short term, it will just be like the layer two, the spider chain. I think we will have extremely low gas fees. Another very big benefit of not being a roll up and actually being decentralized is you don't need to post the data back to the base layer. The only reason you're posting data back to the base layer is because you're very centralized. And so if you are decentralized, you can basically keep the data on the second layer and keep the transaction costs really low. Now, of course, we are an EVM with gas fees, and so the more usage, the more the spider chain is actually transacted on, the higher the gas fees will be. So I think there's only going to be a need for layer threes on the spider chain once we hit those scalability limits, basically like you've seen with Ethereum on the base layer itself.
Got it. But so will Spider Chain still settled or like kind of post transaction onto the Bitcoin L1?
Yeah, we post the root of the Merkle tree, but that's for totally different reasons.
Got it. Got it. Because I mean, I go up to a very original question, like a question that's been asked, I think, in many podcasts. But so, what do you think about the viability long term? Let's say 100 years. I think it's about 100 years for miners and for the Bitcoin network. Like, if a lot of these transactions happen on L2s, maybe L3s, will Bitcoin still get enough fees to keep miners interested long term? I think we see it on Ethereum. Like I look at my like ETH gas tracker; it's currently a four Gwei. It's in the long term, like it might not even work out for Ethereum because there's too many L2s that make everything too cheap. What's your vision on this for Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we often spend too much time thinking about it, maybe like we're trying to predict what's going to happen to the Bitcoin transaction fees 100 years from now, which is like really, really hard to predict because. I mean, even a year ago, people would have the same argument, and then ordinals happens, and transaction fees on Bitcoin spiked. So it's really hard to actually predict what is going to be the transaction fees in the future. I do think one thing that the Bitcoin base layer has that nothing else has is like it is the most secure. Like once you go to a layer two or a layer three, you basically take trust assumptions. And so there's nothing more secure as having a cold wallet on the Bitcoin base layer. And that will always be the fact. And so there will nothing be more secure than transacting on the Bitcoin base layer. And so I think that demand will get filled up. That's my impression. I mean, there's so much that the Bitcoin blockchain on the base layer delivers in terms of immutability, in terms of like security that you can never get anywhere else. So I can see that space being filled up. I mean, we're still
Yeah.
very, very small in the world. Like it's I don't know
Mm.
$1 trillion or something, or the whole crypto market is $1 or $2 trillion. That's not even like 100th of like the global economy and market. So yeah, we got a lot to scale, and 100 years is a very long time.
That is true. We're still early. That's what I remember from that answer. No, that makes a ton of sense. Um, Obviously, we don't have 100 years, and like we typically don't look at immediately 100 years in the future. Tell me a bit more, like short term, like what can we expect from Botanix or Spiderchain in the very near future? Like what's exciting for users? What's coming up in the shorter future? Let's say the next 12 months.
Yeah, very good question. I think look at all the applications that you like, for example, in Ethereum. Like, what have you used personally? And this is a question, of course, for the audience as well. Like, imagine that, but doing it on Bitcoin. That's basically what we're trying to bring and what we're actually also bringing. And so on day one of mainnet, we will have all different building blocks ready for a full DeFi ecosystem. So think about trading, think about borrowing protocols, think about oracles, think about bridges. Yeah, basically anything you would want to do will be there. So we expect to launch with a whole ecosystem ready. Besides that, we've been incubating quite a few founding teams that will basically launch on top of us. They will do, of course, token airdrops as well. And so for a lot of users, there will be a whole playground to like play around. And actually, this will be the first time you can actually do something with your Bitcoin on Bitcoin, which is just incredible. Like most of the people have been using wrap Bitcoin on Ethereum to do the things. And we know, I mean, it's only this week that wrap Bitcoin came under heavy fire and people suddenly realized, wait, wrap Bitcoin is actually very centralized and is now being decentralized with two different parties. And so people suddenly realized that again. And so, I mean, that's the game changer. What if you can actually do it on Bitcoin in a decentralized fashion? That's the value prop, and I think we will see that in the next 12 months.
Fear not, there's Coinbase BTC coming.
Exactly. Yeah.
But no, that's interesting. But so, how do you think of the current like BTC ecosystem community holders? Like, you think they're ready for like this DeFi action, or are you kind of targeting more DeFi, maybe degens or DeFi like users already on Ethereum to try and make them finally do on Bitcoin what they couldn't do on Ethereum, or like what they can already do on Ethereum, but not with the same kind of level of security behind it from BTC? Well, what's like the target here? Is it targeting the, I don't know, the yeah, I don't know. I'll let you answer this. I think it might be easier.
I think both. That's the short and long answer. The more long answer is basically the real Bitcoiners that have only stayed in Bitcoin, they are still hungry for applications. I mean, so many Bitcoin maxis have told me they want to borrow against their Bitcoin. They want to buy a house, but they do not want to sell their Bitcoin. So how do you do that, right? And so I keep telling them, yeah, you can go to Aave, you can put wrap Bitcoin in there, and you can borrow against their Bitcoin. But it doesn't feel like real to them, right? For the Bitcoin maxis, they want to actually do this on Bitcoin. They don't want to sell their Bitcoin, buy Ethereum, then rebuy wrap Bitcoin, and then borrow it against it. And knowingly, it's like a very centralized solution. But if you could do it, if you would have like an Aave on Bitcoin, that's a game changer. Like that's what they want to do, and that's an actual real life use application that they want to use today. So those are the Bitcoiners. I think that's probably going to be like 10% of the users. I think the rest of the crypto ecosystem, a lot of people still have a very big affinity or really like Bitcoin. I think more people are looking at Bitcoin and see, okay, that's the money. I want to earn more Bitcoin. There's actually a lot of traders out there that trade today, and their main goal is making more Bitcoin. Now, of course, if you can do that on Bitcoin, it makes things so much easier. Instead of like trading somewhere else and then eventually the gains flowing back to Bitcoin, it makes so much sense if you can actually do that on Bitcoin. And so I think if you look at ordinals or BRC20s, a lot of those buyers and a lot of those people actually came from outside of Bitcoin. And so I think that will happen again here.
Yeah, I like that, and in a way, how I think about this, it's almost like we've attempted to bring the asset Bitcoin to the tech, which was Ethereum, in the version of wrap BTC. it grew. It did okay, I think, but like it's less than, I think less than 1% of the BTC supply is actually wrapped BTC or is used in DeFi on Ethereum, right? So I feel now with projects like Spiderchain, obviously a lot of other projects, we kind of bringing the tech to the asset. So it's the inverse. So I'm very curious to see how that will play out. But I agree, like honestly, borrowing against your BTC, it's something that's been the goal for many BTC holders, including myself. I actually remember one of the very first videos I ever watched of Michael Saylor. He was saying this. It's like, I should never sell my Bitcoin. I'm going to borrow against it, and BTC will appreciate in price. And my borrowing against the actual like collateral will always decrease in value. So I can just indefinitely borrow as long as BTC keeps going up, which I think is a great value prop. But obviously, you take some risk that if there's big fluctuations, you take risk. And I'm not sure, obviously, if BTC holders are willing to take that risk, because all like what I know as well is like, if you're a Bitcoin holder, you typically you want to hold, you want to make sure you don't lose it. It's like rule number one: don't lose your Bitcoin, right?
Exactly.
So that's, I think, very interesting to see how that will play out in the near future. Um, maybe a last question, like on your views for the future. Like currently, how do you think institutions are viewing? I think not Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin, we've seen institutions do have an interest. We have these ETFs. We have a lot of stuff going on there. How do you think institutions are viewing L2s at this moment?
I think institutions are still running in behind a little bit. They just had the ETFs coming out. They're still looking at the layer one. I think the next step that they obviously will look at is, of course, like Ethereum or Solana. That makes the most sense. But at some point, they'll look at Bitcoin layer twos, and I think that will be very interesting. Like you can start thinking like, what if I can actually get yield on my Bitcoin? Because of course we run a proof of stake, right? All the gas fees in Bitcoin on the Spider chain will accrue back to the stakers. And so you can get Bitcoin yield. And once the institutions will actually see that, I mean, this is all theoretical right now, but I don't think we're too far away from that. Like, what if 12 months from now you can get 5% or 10% yield on your Bitcoin? That's what the institutions will slowly start seeing. It's like, oh, okay, what's happening here? And so you can maybe see a yield bearing Bitcoin ETFs, for example. I think another very interesting aspect is that these ETFs have basically opened up Bitcoin as an asset that is investable in the world. So I don't think only institutions are looking at it, but like governments, big family offices, basically wealth funds. Yeah, I mean a lot of people I think are looking bigger and bigger to move into the space.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the yield aspect is so interesting. Like in a way, interest rates kind of define the way finance, like traditional centralized finance, works nowadays, right? So I think Bitcoin yields eventually will kind of dictate how decentralized finance will work. So I definitely resonate with that answer, and very exciting also to see. There's a lot of yield projects out there. I'm sure there will be tons that are deploying as well on Botanix. I hope there's going to be sufficient demand, obviously, to get that yield also, and like that 5 to 10% on BTC sounds amazing. Not sure if it will be there from the get go, but I think it would be great to obviously get there if there's enough activity.
I actually,
Um,
I actually think the
yeah,
opposite. I think the yields on the earlier days will be higher because it's then considered like more risky, and
yeah,
so there will be a lot of benefits for the people who are gonna like stake early, put their
mm,
Bitcoin at work early, because most of the people, of course, at day one there's still like this a little bit of risk. But if a protocol has been alive for 2 years, that's when you like slowly see the yields drop back to like a natural risk-free rate, more or less.
yeah. But then would that yield be inflationary yield from the newly launched projects, let's say, on top of these networks like Spiderchain that offer staking? Because there's not that many protocols at the moment out there that actually generate real yield, right? So it would be inflationary in nature in the beginning, which is fine, obviously. But I would like to see like real yield, like from real use cases.
Well, if you have, I mean, before the fees dropped on Ethereum, you had $5 billion or something in gas fees a year on Ethereum. And so that's actual yield. And so, what if you have gas fees in Bitcoin on an EVM layer two? That's basically the moment you can get actual Bitcoin yield that is
Nice.
sustainable for a longer period. And so that will be there and will be more or less trustless, permissionless, open source for anyone in the world to look at.
That's a beautiful snippet that we'll have to take here to put out as an episode teaser. I like that. I think we've talked enough about Spider Chain, everything that you guys are building. Maybe a few questions to kind of round up. Is more on the personal side. How do you keep up with all of that? Like you're founder of Botanix, you have a lot of work, definitely like launching this chain. Is there anything in particular on the personal side that you say, look, I can deal with all this stress. It's a crazy industry. It's 24/7. What do you do to keep mentally healthy?
Yeah, I like history, and so I always look back, and the Romans already knew it. And it's like a healthy mind in a healthy body. And so I think, yeah, doing enough sports, reading really keeps you mentally strong. Especially getting enough sleep. So I mean, it's the classical things that we've been knowing as human beings for the last 2,000 years. So yeah, and then I mean, keeping up with what's happening in the industry. Every weekend, I try to like read one paper, a white paper or something. There's always enough to read because I need to stay up to date. Of course, there's a lot of developments, and actually, finally, we have a lot of developments happening on Bitcoin. Of course, with BitVM and roll up teams going. So yeah, I love that. I also because of my cryptography background, I really enjoy reading those things. So it
Nice.
doesn't
And I'm
feel as something I have to do. It feels more as like a hobby.
I'm sure you have a lot of time on planes as well as you go to these different conferences and stuff. That's awesome. Which sports can people like play against you or with you? Like what sports do you do?
Oh, a bunch of everything. I've done a lot in my life. But yeah, now here in New York, I play tennis, pickleball, of course. Then I also like running and cycling. As a real Belgian, of course, I enjoy cycling.
Traditional.
Although it's quite hard here in New York. Hiking, skiing, snowboarding, quite a bunch of different things. In Saudi, I played a lot of beach volleyball. So
Okay.
also into that.
Bit of a generalist, I see, when it
Yeah,
comes to sports.
yeah,
Awesome, awesome. Well, next time we meet in person, we'll play a game of tennis. It
perfect.
would be fun. Um, okay, is there anything else you want to share to the viewers? Like, where can they find you? Where can they find Botanics? How do they like? Where do they go? Like, tell me more.
Yeah, I think we have our official channel on Twitter. That's just on x.com/Botanix Labs. Of course, all the official news will go out of that. We've got the website, but then I would also invite like check out our Discord. We have actually a very vibrant community. The Spider family. It's actually quite cool. We do a lot of fun stuff. So yeah, if you're into that, then definitely check out the Discord.
Awesome. Maybe one last question. I'm sure you being Belgian, you have issues with it as well. I have it with my first name. It seems like your last name is quite difficult to pronounce. How do you pronounce your last name?
I think that's impossible to pronounce. You pronounce it in Dutch "schoe," which has two very different pieces. You have the sch, which is like it's like not really a thing in English, and you've got the French R. So "schoe" it makes it
Tough.
really really hard.
Tough. I can imagine. I like feel your pain. My name's Jeroen, and it's a very tough name in English. But I feel your pain. At least Willem is easy to pronounce in
Yeah,
many
exactly.
languages, so that's awesome. Look, I think this was a great conversation. I think we can round it up here. It was awesome having you. Thank you so much for coming on, Willem. It was a pleasure. Good luck with the upcoming mainnet launch. Everything that you guys are still building. We'll be watching from close by. So yeah, thank you so much, and speak to you later.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Thank
Jeroen.
you so much. Thanks. Bye.